Hello, 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 everyone. It's good to be back. Spend a little bit of time. Let's just do our quick audio check. I should have had this in my ear the whole time. Yeah, I'm good. Looking good. So today we're going to be talking about something that I've been, um, I wouldn't say studying per se, but it's been on the peripheral of what I've spent a lot of time studying. Um, There's probably no good short way to state that because I study so many different things. But you're going to get a sense today of where we're going with things. Population control measures from the 1970s and on beyond, the origins of such, so on and so forth. And basically, it's about why our society is filled with like this is the topic for tonight is like why is our society filled with people who can't afford to buy a home, especially young people. And this seems to be a growing problem, and not I don't mean a problem from the point of view of the frustration of being able to buy a home, but I'm talking about the social friction that occurs, the class warfare that I see brewing because of this. And this began with a meme. I should tonight. The idea of having tonight's broadcast on this topic began with a meme. Let me pull it up here on uh, on X. So this person, Nova Pilgrim, whom by the way, I did extend an offer to be on the podcast tonight, so I don't mind putting her name out there. And even though I disagree with some of what is in her original post. I liked some of her other comments and I resonate with it. And probably more importantly, for the purpose of tonight's broadcast, I resonate with the sentiment behind it. But here's what she says. It's genuinely bizarre watching boomers convince themselves that a couple making $15 an hour at 7-Eleven can buy a home, raise a family, and retire. They'll go down as the generation that was chronically delusional. And I'll just state, there's my reply. This angst is misdirected. These difficulties were engineered by social engineers in the late 60s and through the 70s. Research at NSSM 200, which is was the subject of a previous podcast. You can find that by looking in our archives. And jaffamemo.com to start. That is a website that I own. And Elon Musk has been talking about this for a while. I have a post by him that I'm going to use to discuss this topic with today. Um, so it's the class warfare thing that I don't like about this. It's not class warfare. It's age warfare. I don't know, something like that. It's going after the boomers. And I'm not a boomer. I'm too young to be a boomer. And complain about people trying to make it through on a $15 an hour job. And my problem when I survey this is that I know why there are only $15 an hour jobs available to these people. And it has very little to do with the boomers. It had something much more to do with, as I said, social engineers, people who believe that they're smarter than the rest of us, better than the rest of us. They had science at their backing, and they implemented policies, and we have not really grappled with what those policies were and the legacy they've left us today. And that is the topic for today's podcast, is to try to set the record straight, to understand that there's a lot of reasons why they have nothing to do with the boomers, why people have trouble affording homes, and young people in particular. So let me get rid of this meme, which we will return to. Let me talk about the my thumbnail. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but that thumbnail there is it's a house made of balloons. Clever, right? I gave AI the prompt. That was the best that it could do. It was, and it's about to pop, right? Now, the thought that probably would have come to your mind to begin with is the housing bubble of 2008, which is connected, right? But and maybe we'll talk about that as well. But when I say it always pops, what I mean is that whenever a uh we'll just use the government. Whenever the government uh, create puts a policy in place that distorts the marketplace significantly, you can go on for a while before you notice anything, but eventually the distortion pops. It creates problems, and then we have to deal with it. And the thing that bothers me, and the thing that I want to discuss in today's podcast, the thing that bothers me is like we don't know why, like we don't realize how we got into the situation that we're in. We're like actually like living on the bubble. We're like our context for understanding what has happened to us a lot of times as a society is only like 5 years at most. Like even now, we're living with the consequences and the implications of COVID, and you can hardly tell. Like we've just gone on as if life is normal, when in fact life has still very much been continued to be impacted by the events of COVID, from a financial, global, trade point of view, and so on and so forth. So a good example of a government policy that eventually goes pop, which is related to tonight's topic, is China's one-child policy. Right? Talk about a distortion in the quote market. In the 1970s, Western quote scientists convinced a lot of people that the Earth was on a trajectory for overpopulation, and unless um, something was done drastically about it, it would be like the end of the world. Paul Ehrlich has his book 1969, The Population Bomb. But it was the group, the Club for Rome, the name, Rome, Club for Rome, possibly put out a statistical study, which for some people that counts as science, rock hard science, right? Um, and they showed how we're going to run out of our resources, blah blah blah. So China like sees that, put it into practice, and yada yada yada. 40, 50 years later, all of a sudden, China's in a situation where they have a lot more boys than girls, and there's no substitute for girls, as it turns out, if you want to um, have a nation that sustains itself demographically. And so there's a lot of reasons for why that quote popped. Um, if you could only have one child, a lot of the Chinese parents would choose to have a son so that they would have someone to support them when they retired, so on and so forth. There's in all of these bubbles, wherever we find them, what happens is you've got some group of people. They almost always think they're smarter than you. They always think they're better than you. I mean, there's those things in common. Just make a decision about everyone. They they usually entrench that decision in the coercive powers of the government, and then people begin to kind of move around within that framework, making decisions on their own like resources, trying to figure out what's best for them, and chart a course through, maybe dodge this requirement or make this adjustment. And the policymakers, there's no way they can compensate or take into account all of these um, myriad of micro decisions that are made when people start trying to figure out what to do. And in China, you would think that the policymakers would have realized something as simple as, hey, if we only allow them to have one child, they're only going to choose to have boys. But they didn't. And by the time that they figured it out, these are the smartest people in the world, mind you, the policymakers. It was too late. And what they've actually found over time with the depopulation measures that they've implemented is that a lot of times when they figure out that they've made a mistake and they try to change course and incentivize having larger families or whatnot, they can't do it. It doesn't work. Um, China is a good example. Russia a few years back now tried to take measures to uh, give people more money if they had more children, that kind of thing, and it just didn't work because what has happened is attitudes have become entrenched, and the smart people, the geniuses, the technocrats, in their ivory towers, we're not able to see them. We're not able the thing that was happening was basically immeasurable because it was inside the human mind, right? And so therefore out of reach. And you just can't change that kind of thing overnight, no matter what you do. So anyway, it always pops. These whenever policies are put into place that no one can escape, eventually circumstances get out of control, and it goes kablooey. Another good example of this happening in real time right now are the high college prices here in America. I can't speak to other places. Uh, and it actually kind of does tie into what we're talking about tonight. Policies were set into motion in the late 70s and the 80s. They had the result of accelerating exponentially the prices of college. And now here we are, where college uh, tuition is so far out of reach that you have to go into, if you're going to do it, massive amounts of debt in order to do it. And pretty much the whole system is geared towards pushing people into college and geared into taking out these high loans. And now here's that social friction, right? You've got people who come out of college with generally worthless degrees, a lot of them. Um, and now they have no way to repay the loan, let alone afford a new home, right? Uh, this is that's an example of a bubble. Um, so we're gonna kind of come around and try to explain. I'm gonna try to help explain how some of these forces have conspired to bring us into our situation, in particular, the new home buyer. But we'll see. It's such a big topic. Before I go on, I don't think I gave my name. Hey, I'm Anthony Horvath, host of the Gutencast. The book that we're featuring tonight is The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, which is 1909. Let me double check here. Yeah, 1909. Crazy stuff. And by the end of this, maybe you'll have some appreciation why I chose this book. But I'm going to read some excerpts from this book a little bit later, and you'll see the connection, I hope, to our modern day situation. But E.M. Forster, 1909. Buy it on Gutenberg Press or on Amazon. So let's move this aside here. And let's go back to this meme. The meme that started it all. Now, I invited her. She didn't reply. I know that she saw it because she liked when I said that I was going to be referring to it. And that's okay. I mean, I'm a complete stranger to her. And maybe she'll pick it up later. And, not trying to throw shade on her. But we're gonna chop this up and dissect it just a little bit more. So the boomers are that era that I'm referring to in the 70s, right? But in the 1970s, they were still just kids, right? And this is really not fair from that point of view alone. to try to say that this is all the boomers' fault. So we're talking about 25, 30 years old themselves at the time. And they were just as much a victim of these new policies as anybody else, although at the earliest stages. So what has basically happened is they got in at the beginning of the bubble. So maybe we can be annoyed with them for that, but they were just carried along with by the policies just like everybody else. What was really happening behind the scenes was that people had decided that there were too many people and we needed to reduce their numbers dramatically. And the fact that people could not the fact that people could afford homes was actually the problem, because if a person can afford a home, buy a home, then they have the latitude to stretch their wings, to make decisions on their own. There's certain freedoms and liberties that come from owning your own home that you don't have as a renter. And I think to help make this um, clear, I think I just should just jump right to this. Now, I said that home ownership is tangential to the things that I have researched, but has been there. So let me give you the context of this. I have not talked about the Jaffa memo yet as a dedicated thing. I don't think I've brought it up even once on the podcast uh, ever yet. This might be the first time. It deserves its own podcast or two. But the Jaffa memo was a memo that was written by the vice president for global depopulation of Planned Parenthood in 1969. And a guy named Bernard Berelson, who was the president of the Population Council, had been making headway in the Nixon administration for passing a population control law. And this is, I covered a lot of that history in my podcast on NSSM 200, so look that up. So anyway, Barrelson knew that they were making this headway, so he reached out to his buddy uh, Frederick Jaffa and said, "Hey, give me all of your ideas because we are going to be able to do some of this stuff. We're going to be able to make this federal policy." And so Jaffa wrote a, I don't know, 12-page report. And this is a table from that. I don't know if report's the word, but this is a table where he sort of put it all into one place for people to look at. And I just want to say here, in the bottom, these sources that are listed, these are the sources that Jaffa himself referred to. Um, an article by Davis in Science, Michael Young's remarks at the NIH conference, Lawrence and what was her name? Alice Day, I forget. Too Many Americans, um, Blake in Public Health and Population Change, and Shockley, William Shockley, which is kind of funny if you look up him and see why would anyone would have anything to do with him. And I have acquired pretty much all of those documents so that I could make sure that I could understand the context of this memo. And I have their sources and the sources that they've referred to. I should probably write a book on it. I've researched it so darn much. I think I'm going to bring it above me. So there we go. So let's just look here. Proposed measures to reduce fertility by universality or selectivity of impact in the United States. And again, this is his chart and his sources. And he's just spitballing here, folks. He's not explicitly advocating for any of them. No one should ever think that, right? On the left side, social constraints. Restructure the family. Postpone or avoid marriage. Alter image of ideal family size. Compulsory education of children. Just think about that one the next time you hear an argument for compulsory education. Encourage increased homosexuality. None of this has happened, folks. Educate for family limitation. Fertility control agents in the water supply. Encourage women to work. Remember, these are all ideas that they were looking to actually implement and integrate in the federal policy in the 1970s. You get the idea. Let's look at the next column over. Tax policies. Create a marriage tax. Has not happened. Child tax hasn't happened. Tax to the married more than single hasn't happened. Remove the parents' tax exemption, right? Yeah, those things haven't happened. In fact, some people would argue it's gone the other direction. But look at the third line down. Chronic depression. I love this. This was on the table for consideration by the head of Planned Parenthood, 1969, submitted to Bernard Berelson, who took it to Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Great stuff. We want people to be chronically depressed. It makes you kind of look at the our mental health crisis in this country a little bit different, right? Like we just sort of behave all the time as if it just something that is happening to us. Like I walked outside and I got hit by a meteor. No sense that maybe the meteor was thrown at you. But here, look at this one. Require women to work and provide few child care facilities. So you hear about the child care facility crisis, I assume, right? Well, up until about the 1960s and 70s, um, having child care as a thing wasn't really out there that much at all. And now politicians are bending over backwards, left and right, to try to provide child care for people. And this is through government subsidies and whatnot. In fact, just last week, I heard some politicians actually, I don't know if boast is the word, but they were really happy that they had managed to find a way to divert some money from the public schools for, like, we're talking about like 4-year-olds into childcare, so that childcare, so that parents would have a choice. And I don't necessarily oppose to that, but maybe we should be talking about why people need so many why both parents need to work in order to survive, right? And we'll come to that. I had maybe I'll share my own story, my own experience with that as we go on, but I want to get through this list here. I mean, you can see them all yourself at this point. You probably already read them, but let me call attention to the social controls, the third column over. Down below, skipping over the compulsory sterilization, housing policies, discouragement of private home ownership. Now, that's a pretty remarkable thing. And I've asked people to speculate over the years. I've given lots of presentations on this actually over the years. And I've asked them to speculate, like, what does having your own home have to do with reducing the population? And usually people kind of had to like struggle through it. And most of the time they were able to come up with the answers. But this is, I think, one of our key clues as to how we're in our situation today. So we should evaluate this. We should think about this. Discouragement of private home ownership. What could that possibly have to do with the fertility decline? the replacement rate or whatnot. This podcast today is not about population control per se, but this is related, right? If in the 1970s, our federal bureaucrats, our politicians, or whatnot, put into motion forces that would make it hard to buy a home, and here we are 50 years later, and people are having trouble buying a home, that's relevant, right? I think that's like on the nose relevant. And I don't think, whenever I have heard debates about this and conversations, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, like in public, like from a debate stage, I'm talking about politicians or whatnot. The problem that we're having here is people can't afford to buy homes because policies have been put into place to make it hard for people to buy homes, like on purpose. That was the goal. That was the plan. I have not heard anyone ever say that. If you, my viewer, have ever heard someone say that in a public space, I'm talking about like a politicians or whatnot, or maybe a um, letter to the editor at a newspaper or something, please be sure to let me know about it. So, tracking how whether or not, I should say this, it's pretty clear that not every idea that was on this memo was ever actually implemented. Nixon himself recognized that this whole thing was a political hand grenade. And when Kissinger brought back his report, NSSM 200, the Kissinger report, calling for the depopulation of the earth, Nixon quietly shelved it. This is before Watergate. He's not the one that implemented it. It was Gerald Ford that implemented it. So, Nixon, uh, love him or hate him, he had at least he had his finger on what the public could stand and would not stand. So, a lot of these ideas didn't go anywhere really beyond the fact that um, Nixon did sign into law the formation of the Office for Population Affairs, which is a population control federal bureaucracy, which still exists today. Look it up; it's there. They have a website. Seen it? Maybe someone, a viewer, can post it in there. OPA, I believe, Office for Population Affairs. So, the reason why I've led with this is because when we talk about topics today, from any number of perspectives, I think it's important to understand and recognize that it isn't even just that we're living in a vacuum. It isn't even just that, excuse me, it isn't as though no one thinks we're living in a vacuum. How do I put this? It's not that there are things that are happening in the marketplace or in our society that just happen like a series of accidents. I gave the example of randomly being struck by a meteor, just bad luck. Some of these things that are happening to us have been put in motion by people that I would consider to be malevolent. They consider themselves, of course, to be acting perfectly, um, sincerely, and with the best of intentions. I personally consider them to be very bad people. And in their defense, most of them are dead. And now, today, we're living with their legacy, and we continue to further some of these policies without knowing who created them in the first place, who has left us with this baggage. And unless we understand that we as a society have been deliberately targeted, uh, and that possibly some of that targeting continues, we're basically defenseless. And when we talk about, well, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to respond to this? It'd be the same thing like if you're preparing for some sort of disaster in your home. If you're just worried about a flood or a fire or a tornado or something like that, you take certain precautions. But if you think there could be intelligent agents that are coming after you, it changes the whole dynamic of your preparations, right? Anyway, so we will probably have reason to come back to this. I'll throw it off to the side for now. Should I, do I really want to talk about this right now? Not sure. Well, this is just Europe. The replacement rate, excuse me, the fertility rate in America is like 1.6 or 7 also. So it's not much higher than in these. And in these posts, um, this is Elon Musk posting something for someone else. I think I might want to come back to this. What should I go to first? Let's do this. Let's go back a little bit further in time, even though it might be a little bit boring. So when we try to think about where to begin understanding the context of what has brought us to whatever situation that we're in, we could go back really to the beginning of time. And so unfortunately we have to pick a spot. We have to pick a place in our history that is relevant and a decent starting point. So I decided to start with the National Housing Act of 1934, FDR. So you may not realize this, but the 30-year mortgage was essentially an innovation, an American innovation. And it was the government getting involved in resolving the issues that had arisen during the Great Depression. So before this, and actually there's a really good article about this. Thought I saw a nice quote here. Well, anyway, yeah, here we go. Here we go. This is what I'm looking for. So before this, 55% of all Americans were renters. I'm reading from this website here. Those that did own homes typically had mortgages with 5-year terms. Because balloon mortgages relied on a large lump sum payment at the end of the mortgage term, borrowers would typically refinance each time their term was up. So here's how it worked. This is pre-FDR, pre-Great Depression. A bank would give out like a 5-year term. Suppose you can't really see there we go. And then the whole note was due at the end of that 5 years. This is kind of the way it worked. And this was okay. I mean, people were able to buy homes, but then what would happen is when they got to the end, they would attempt to refinance, and that also worked fine until the Great Depression, and now all the banks were closing, right? And now people were getting thrown out of their homes. Unfortunately, this is like when I say, well, okay, well, where are we going to choose our moment to begin understanding our historical context? I chose 1934, but you can see that we also could have gone back to the beginning of the creation of the Federal Reserve, right? Because the Great Depression was also the result of many government policies that had gone bonkers, that had facilitated a lot of money was dumped into the system, and people needed a place to put it, and it led to speculation and in the markets and so on and so forth. And so now the Great Depression came as a correction to this. And so what had been working from a free market point of view were these 5-year balloon mortgages, but because of government programs and factors, now there was no banks, and now the free market was not able to to do anything. So now you got people who are just laid off and homeless and wandering the countryside, and even the rich people were begging sometimes. And this is a good example of what I mean by the bubbles always pop. So the Federal Reserve was what, 19 14? Oh man, usually I have that number right off the top of my head. It'll come to me right in there. It was Woodrow Wilson. Um, Dang it, hate it when I have a fact. It's just right on the tip of my tongue, especially one that I've used so many times. Anyway, um, the balloon always pops, right? So they created the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was supposed to stabilize the economy. Everything was going to be great, but instead, what it did was it began to lead to inflation because the money supply was increasing, and one thing led to another. And no one could, I would think, from my readings, no one thought that you could have something like a Great Depression result from this and the collapse of the housing market. But that's exactly what happened, right? So I'm not necessarily here to go after FDR for this, but it does become a problem when we solve a problem created by the government with a new solution by the government. And that's essentially what has happened with us today. We've essentially had this 30-year mortgage um, backbone of our economy, and instead of leading to wealth, as this article points out, what tends to happen is people only stay in their home for 5 to 8 years, and then they cash out with the small amount of equity they earned, because you don't get a lot of equity at the very beginning of the repayment term, and they just go right back into debt again. And then here's the thing: the Federal Reserve continues to print money, more money. And those who are able to get loans do so, and those who struggle are not able to. And so now you have people competing for these homes who can borrow more and more and more until suddenly you have houses that are being sold for $300,000, $400,000. The small houses, mind you, small houses. And of course, somebody who's only making $15 an hour at 7-Eleven is not going to be able to compete with that. So is it the boomers, or was it the money supply? Well, the money supply issue preceded the boomers by quite a bit. So this is a really fascinating article. It's part of a series. I think it's useful if you've never looked into like why we're in the situation that we're in today, like to begin unraveling all the different strands that led it to where we're at right now. But we'll come back to that too. And we'll come back to that. Here we go. Since we have a quiet moment here, me and my one viewer. Hello, one viewer. When I was looking this stuff up and doing some research, I was looking at YouTube videos. Well, I was looking all over the place, but I thought, well, let's see what has been talked about on YouTube. And I found some YouTube videos that talked about some of these issues, and they had like 10 views, 15 views, 20 views. And I'm like, well, clearly this is not something that draws a lot of viewer attention. But I think that just proves my point. We are operating in our society as if these things are just happening to us, and we're not thinking about how we got here, and how can we possibly unravel it if we don't know how we got here. All right, so let me pull together a couple of other threads here. This is so here, this is crazy. Like, remember our person here, what was it, $15 an hour at 7-Eleven. Okay. but the current average sale price of a house is $400,000. Holy crap, right? So when I brought this up on Facebook, there was a conversation about with someone who had bought their house. I don't remember what the number was, something real small amount, but it currently appraises at like, I should just go look it up, 80,000 or whatever it was. And someone worked out, that would be like doable. You could afford that mortgage with only $22 an hour or whatnot. But then the trick is, how many homes can you find that are appraised at 80,000 or whatnot? And she bought it for far less than that, right? And here you have the current average sale price, $400,000. Well, no wonder people are having trouble affording a loan. But this goes into the bubble. Let's talk about the 2008 bubble again, because I think we're still dealing with many of the same issues. And this is going to be connected. So, strangely enough, the 2008 bubble was itself the culmination of a series of government policies, especially, or I shouldn't say especially, but significantly, the Community Redevelopment Act of, I believe, 1979 under Jimmy Carter, which had the audacity to force banks to give out loans to people that they knew could not afford to repay them. The CDA. Do I have a Jamie on here? Anyone? I know I have one viewer here, but I don't know who it is yet. Community Reinvestment Act. 77. Yeah, okay. And interestingly, a certain Barack Obama made some of his attention in Chicago by suing or coercing banks to follow through on the CRA. At any rate, so that was 77. Over the 1980s and the 1990s, then banks continued to give out loans to people who couldn't afford them, and they relaxed the standards, and they got rid of the down payment in many situations, or made them very, very generous. And then we got to around 2000. So around 2000, I myself was looking to buy a home, and I had thoughts on having a family at that point. And I couldn't believe how much things were costing. And then 9/11 happened, and it was like, okay, it's kind of like a do or die kind of a thing. So then we began thinking to ourselves, okay, if we don't just bite the bullet and buy one of these homes that has been accelerating in value, we're going to be living in a basement for forever. This would be about 2002-ish now. So we found a house which was listed for 105,000. I think we bought it for 95,000, maybe 98. So I took the time to go down to the county to check the property records. Only about 7 years before that, that same property had sold for $32,000. About 4 or 5 years after that, so only about 4 years before we bought it, it had sold for $64,000. Don't hold me to these numbers exactly if you're one of those freaks who's going to go track it down. Something like that. So we're to believe that this house had doubled in value in 3 years. Well, no. What was happening is because of the influx of money into the system, people had a lot of money that they could borrow, and you had banks who basically were over a barrel and they were forced to give out these loans. Okay, but there's no way a house doubles in value in 3 or 4 years. It just shouldn't happen. And we were buying it in 2002. And less than 10 years after that, they wanted 105 for it. So it had gone up 3 times in less than 10 years. This is the bubble. This is what led to what eventually would collapse. And we took advantage of that at the time in some way. Part of it was we felt that we really had no choice. It was either at that time 100,000. I mean, that's a lot of money, but it's far short of 400,000 for a new single family home, right? It was on the low end, so it wasn't like we were going out and spending a ton more money beyond what we could afford to repay. But it was either raise our family in a basement or a 1 bedroom apartment, or just bite the bullet and give the guy his 100,000. There's no way we're gonna be able to make an offer for 70 grand, which would have been, still more than what it had sold for a few years before, and have it accepted. And he didn't have to worry about it. Eventually, someone would have come along and buy it at his price. So that's what we did, and we got our generous loan. And then 2007, 2008 came, and our home, which had been at that point, we refinanced for about 150,000, I think, um, is now worth, like, it appraised at 150. We were being taxed as if it was worth 150. Was now back down to 100 again, and we were underwater like all these other people. Now we were in a position where we did not like overborrow, and yet it was still really painful for us. We ended up being able to get out of that house at break even, but it was like by the skin of our teeth. Just super super lucky. We had to have renters for a while we worked on having the market rebound just enough so that we could get our price. But it was rough. It was a rough time for us. Financially, it was stressful, and I can see very easily from a firsthand point of view how hard it is to buy a home on one income when you've got people left and right who are just piling, like, they're matching your offer and then adding 20 grand on it, right? You make an offer, and then there's a counter offer and a counter offer, and now we're at $400,000 as average for a new single family home. So a lot of this has to do with money supply. So what are we going to do about that? This is the problem right here. So someone says, are you going to share solutions? Well, the only solution to this is to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And there's like only like 5 people in Congress that have any interest whatsoever in doing that. So I don't know what to tell you, but we're not going to find any solution to that, right? But that would be one way of unraveling it. We've got to get the money out of the system. It's got to be sucked up and soaked out and gotten rid of. And unless that happens, we're going to have another housing bubble in a few more years. So what happened in 2008 is actually still with us, because all those bad mortgages, because eventually they got so high that the people couldn't repay them, the government just absorbed them. They put them on their own balance sheet, and that's where they still sit today as more debt owned by the federal government. Now, in the meantime, other things have been happening as well. So this is why I brought this up right here. This is from a construction website. Home building costs soar due to government regulations and material price increases. This is 2021. Now, of course, that was COVID, right? So we understand that part for the material prices, but the regulations are a different part of it. Uh, Regulations imposed by all levels of government account for $93,000 of that $400,000 price tag. Now, as you scroll down through here, a lot of it is, you can tell it's going to depend on the region. Um, Zoning approval, um, labor regulations, um, OSHA stuff, architectural design standards beyond the ordinary. So I assume like some inspectors come in and says, "Hey, you've got to do this and that." Change the building codes over the past 10 years, so on and so forth. So this number, I don't think that's going to apply for every place in the country, but this is a generalization, right? So we're talking about, well, why is it so hard for a young person to afford a new home? Well, to build a new home, a builder is going to have to factor in right from the very start. We'll just say 20%. 20% right off the top. That's going to have to go to various governments, right? 20%. Blammo. So how are you going to make affordable housing? Obviously, he's going to have to increase the price of the sale price by at least that 20%. He's not going to work for free, right? That's just ridiculous. It's not going to happen, and it has nothing to do with any boomers either, unless you're going to blame all the regulations on the boomers. No, it's not going to happen. That doesn't even make sense because these regulations have continued to accrue every year. They get tighter and tighter because this is why people are moving from places like California to Texas, in large part because you can build easier, you can build cheaper, you can run a business cheaper. These regulations add up, and meantime, we just continue to go about our business as if, oh well, gee whiz, why home prices are so high. Um, wah, wah, wah. Without saying, oh, well, maybe they're so high because of talked about the inflationary effects of the money supply, but now because of the costs of regulations. And I've had lots of experiences fighting this topic. Give you a couple anecdotes. Well, how about I start with this one? While researching my family tree a few years ago, I found out that some of my ancestors, when they first came to America, went to the Dakotas, and they lived literally, this presumably in like 1880, 1890, give or take, in like a dirt house, a mud house of some kind. Now, I don't think that's ideal. I think most of us wouldn't want to live in a dirt house. I would live in a dirt house. In fact, I've been wanting to live in an earth bag house for many years, but my wife won't let me. But I digress. But a dirt house has got to, that's pretty cheap, right? A shovel, pile of dirt, and you can make that work. What would happen if you tried to live like that today? If you tried to live like that today, you'd have inspectors on your ass faster than you could say Woodrow Wilson likes to. Well, I can't. Never. I won't complete that thought. Um, and if they had kids, those kids would be removed, right? You can live affordably, but you're not allowed to live affordably. Affordably is kind of where I'm going with this. The things that we used to be able to do in this country to get by are absolutely actually forbidden today. This is sort of a related anecdote, but maybe about a year ago, there was this woman who was arrested because she let her kid, who I believe was like 7 or 8, walk to town unassisted. I mean, really? I mean, when I was 7 or 8, I was roaming city blocks, right? I wasn't like heading down into downtown urban center or anything, but like, I was able to go to the store on my own. And now the parents will be arrested for that. So we have this like hyper nanny society. We've got regulations up the wazoo. We got building codes up the wazoo. We look down our nose at people who live in ways. I shouldn't even say look down our nose. We literally will not let them live in a way that they can afford, and instead we force them into bad situations, and then we try to compensate with government assistance or welfare or something like that. When if they had been allowed to, they probably would have come up with a solution, and it would not have been permanent because nobody wants to live like that forever. But they would have been able to save up money, and they would have been able to do it right. And if there wasn't so much money floating around the system, and there were not all these regulations, they wouldn't have to pay $400,000 for a decent home. They'd only have to pay 50,000 or 60,000 for a decent home, and that's not an absurd number because my first house was 50,000. That was only 25 years ago, and I bet you right now it's I'd have to look. I haven't looked, but I bet you it's like triple that now. And there's no way that thing ought to be triple. So these regulations are also causing pain. So let's try to bring together some of the things that are happening here. One, we have in the 70s, we have a group of people who decide that they actually want to discourage home ownership, and they um, put into effect policies, which we have not specified, but you may begin to guess if you wish, that would make that possible. Kids began going to college, and it became because of the availability of loans. College tuition got out of control as home prices got out of control, as home building prices got out of control, as zoning and other regulations got out of control. What what do you think is going to happen? So this is why I'm like I don't think we need this class warfare thing. I don't think we need to be going after the boomers. I think what we need to do is take a sober look at what we're doing today in this particular moment in time, and say, hey, I got to stop voting for the people who do these things. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean. So a fight that I got into in the 2000s was with a politician over whether or not you should be able to have chickens at your house, and this was in a small town, but it was a city setting. The lots were usually big enough that most people could easily have 3 to 5 hens and wouldn't cause a problem. And this was a very interesting conversation with this politician. I said, people would be able to sustain themselves very well, or a lot better, if they could find a way to provide for some of their own needs. There's no reason why. Like, what would be the reason for not letting people have 3 to 5 chickens? Especially if you said you can't have roosters, you can just have the chickens. And he said, well, has it occurred to you that maybe we don't want people in this community who need to raise chickens in order to afford their food? We don't want those kinds of people. We want only the affluent. Well, that was an interesting thing to hear from a politician, don't you think? And do you think that this was a Republican politician? No, hell no. That was a Democrat politician, friends. And that was words right out of his mouth. And I liked the guy, he was a nice guy. But here you have an example of someone who has the opportunity to make it possible so that people who are not as well off can provide for their own material needs. And his policy for his town was We don't want those kinds of people here. So we will pass laws that will make it harder for those people to live in our community. Now multiply that out over thousands of communities. Here's another example. There was a dispute over the kinds of signs that businesses could have. The community was going to require all businesses to build their signs. You know how their signs. Um, I don't want to give it any names or whatever. A business will have a sign out in front of their establishments. So people know where they are. They were going to require them to build them with very nice looking, expensive brick, among other expensive additions as well. This was going to be required, and so I went to them and I said, the only people who are going to be able to afford, the only companies that are going to be able to afford to have businesses in this community are going to be the chains, right? It's going to be the ones that not only can they afford um, the new materials, but they're going to have the resources to even find out what the requirements are. And when I inquired about this, I asked for proof that some kind of evidence that this wasn't just some sort of arbitrary thing. And the argument that was given to me was that businesses that have brick signs will have better resale value. I don't know what they had to do with the businesses per se. We weren't talking about homes. And I asked for and received a study, and it was a study in the cost appreciation of bricks, and it was made by the brick maker. Like the study had been commissioned by the brick makers. So thanks a lot for giving me a study showing me impartially about the value of this. And if you go back to that town now, there's very few small privately owned businesses. It's just one new chain operation after another, because it's just, well, like I said, the small business can't afford to pay for those higher costs, and can't even afford to even keep abreast of what they are. I'll give one last example. Um, this is back in the area that I'm at right now. Um, a few years ago now, the Amish, there's a lot of Amish in our area, got into trouble with one of the counties that are nearby, and the county wanted to have a building code that required certain safety measures. This is part of the zoning or requirements or whatnot. And now, if you're not, I'm sure you've heard of the Amish, but we have a lot of them around here. The Amish live very, very cheaply. So like it it can be done. That's kind of like one of the takeaways. They don't have cars, so that helps. I'm just saying, if you're willing to make the sacrifices, you can live affordably, and that doesn't mean that the Amish are poor. Actually, quite a few of them are very wealthy because did I mention that they like don't buy cars, you know, and other very expensive things. At any rate, the local the county I don't know, the city planners of some county planners decided that they were going to take a firm hand, and they were going to require that the Amish buildings complied with modern safety measures, like, for example, smoke alarms, but not just any smoke alarms. The smoke alarms had to be the kind that were tied into the electrical system of the house. Now, Amish houses don't have electricity. So obviously there was no way that they could do this. So did this county care? Did the county think to themselves, we're now asking that these families to go back into their homes and and retrofit them. I don't know what the cost would be to retrofit a whole house with electricity. I mean, I guess maybe it wouldn't be that much if as much. It's not the whole house if you just do enough to do the electric, but probably thousands of dollars. Um, 3 or 4 thousand doesn't seem to be out of reach to me. And did this county care? No, this county did not give a rat's ass about the cost that they were imposing on these families. In fact, they actually began locking the doors and blocking with police, forbidding the Amish people from going back into their own homes. so, so Amish people don't want to burn to death any more than anybody else, right? The so it's like it's not like you say, well, we have all these regulations and zoning. If we didn't do them, then we would all be living in squalor and we'd all be living in unsafe situations. Well, some people would, but most people don't want to live in a structure that they think is going to fall down on their heads. And most people are going to make sure that doesn't happen, and they don't need the government to tell them not to, like to do it. So the Amish people have been living for centuries without smoke detectors, and it literally took a politician spearheading a piece of legislation at the state to basically veto what this county did, so that these Amish people could live in their own homes, which they've been living in already for decades. So then I went and I talked to the politician because I don't. I mean, I have electricity. I mean, I'm not Amish in that sense, but there are other building codes that are just stupid that I shouldn't have to comply with. Like they're just basically optional. They're like the bricks of that I was referring to before. Like they just arbitrarily, that community says, "Oh, we like bricks, so we're going to make everyone use bricks." And a lot of the building codes are just that. Some rich construction manufacturer somewhere got a hold of a lobbyist, and the lobbyist got the government to go their way, and now we all have to go through these ridiculous hurdles that I don't need, especially out here in the country. We don't need them. They're not important. So I made that argument to well, I was having this conversation with the politician. And this politician was very proud that they were able to restore liberty and freedom to the Amish person, the Amish family. And I said, "Well, what about me?" And the politician just looked at me like what do you care? Like why is this even relevant? So essentially, I've had to pay tens of thousands of dollars more because of various regulations. And as someone who has a family and has other bills, that's money that I would like to, that would make it easier for me to live my life if it was back in my pocket. But instead, I had to pay for basically something that was useless to me. Now, multiply that scenario out over tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of structures, and we can see how these costs begin to add up, and it becomes harder and harder for anyone to own a home, to buy a home. Because even if you are able to sell, if I were able to sell my home now, this is what happened during the 2008 thing, just before the bubble popped, we'll say. In 2005, I probably could have sold my house for 200,000, I guess, maybe. But then where would I go to buy a house for less than 300,000? You just couldn't do it. So basically you get trapped in that situation. So all of these problems really come about because somewhere along the lines, whether it was by accident, as a result of trying to fix the problems of the Great Depression and the Federal Reserve, to actual malevolence, where in the 1970s people said, "Hey, how can we make it harder for people to afford homes?" To where we're at today, it's one government solution after another, and they all intrude on the free market choices that people make, and then people try to wriggle out of them as best as they can, And then that ends up creating new problems for the government to solve 20 years from now. And this just keeps happening. So what's the solution? The solution is, I mean, have a drink. I mean, no one's no one that I ever talked to, except for some crazy libertarians, I guess, on X, is ever going is like they'll all say the same thing. Well, we need all these building codes. We need the uniform building code. Everyone needs to go to college. We need to do that. We need to go into to debt to do this. We got to have debt. We got to do this. And instead of getting rid of the things that cause us to have to go to submit to that system, we just make the system bigger. We just engorge it. Like right now, Donald Trump just passed in the big beautiful bill. There's now apparently a provision in there that will let renters use their rent payment as it goes on their credit report somehow. It builds their credit history. So prior to this, they were not getting equity, obviously, as a renter, but they also weren't getting credit for being timely payers. Now, I don't know what kind of burden that's going to put on the other side on the people who own the structures. But at the very least, it is going to be good for renters because they'll be able to have that credit history. So when they do finally want to go and build a house, or excuse me, buy a house, they will have that to their name. But that's like nibbling around the edges. What the big beautiful bill did was basically looked at the system, said, how can we tweak it? What we need are people who are going to go in and look at it, say, this is a system. We need to get rid of this thing. We need to just toss it. Now, one last thing I'm going to talk about as to these costs, and then I'm going to wrap it up, is property taxes. So just in the last 2 years, my property taxes have gone up more than $1,000. So that's just property taxes, right? So like I don't actually, if my home was completely paid off, my property taxes are, I don't know, about $4,000 a year. So if I don't pay my property tax, what happens to my house? Do I get to keep it? No, they can come take it away. So do I own it? Not really. Not actually. Even if it was completely paid off, I would be paying rent on my land in the name of property taxes to the government to the tune of $350, $400 a month. So even if you own a home, you're still in trouble because the way that property values are going up right now. This is the ridiculous thing. I was just talking with somebody who had a situation where their property taxes also went up like about $1,000, and it was not someone from this area, but it was because the whole neighborhood had been reappraised, and everybody's home values had gone up. What was it? Everybody's home values had gone up like by 40%. And so then the government came in, the local governments came in and obviously raised the property taxes because the houses were worth more. Well, how is the value of a house decided? Based on recent sale prices, right? Comps, comparables. So in their particular case, someone had remember all this, the big money. Someone was able to get out a giant loan to outcompete other offers and pay like basically double or triple on a house that than the appraisal amount, and they were able to get the house. And so now they have this really big. That person has a very expensive house, but it raised everybody else's values. So now they have all the property taxes go up. So now you have a situation where even people who can afford a home can't afford a home because of all the money that has flown into the system. So between property taxes, building codes, local ordinances, zoning, um, high amount of debt, both from an individual level and the amount of debt carried by the government in terms of all these loans. You have a spiraling crisis where it's no wonder you can't own a home. With that, a young person just out of college can own a home. It's no surprise, and to blame it on the boomers, and I know they get a lot of bad rap for a lot of things, but this is not a boomer thing. This is a, hey, we got to get, you voted for the people who support this stuff too. I vote for the people who will get rid of it, and they always lose in the primary. So don't blame me. I'm doing my part. Everyone else has to do their part. So I mentioned this book at the beginning here. You know what? I realize I have not talked about this, which is fine. I should maybe mention this. This was a study recently out. And this talks about these regulations from a slightly different perspective about how they are preventing people from affording homes. But let me put it to this in this way. So it's basically supply and demand, right? In a normal situation, if you have a large supply of buyers, in this case, lots, we'll say you're young, newly married couple, then you would think what you would expect is the market would respond by increasing the demand, right? Now, that happens in just about everything. Like you don't have to tell anyone to do it. For the most part, if there's a supply, someone will see the opportunity and create the demand. The fact that the demand has not been created tells you something is wrong. There has been a distortion in the marketplace. Someone has taken invisible hand and is stepping on it. Because this is a problem that would solve itself if some forces, which I have tried to sketch in this podcast today, if some forces were not preventing it. And this article talks about some of those things and about how you because of environmental pressures and um, public planners who don't allow certain kind of homes or structures to be built in other certain places, stifling the ability to provide the supply in an area. The result is young people can't afford. They can't even find the houses. That I think that's the thing. Like even if they could afford it, to actually find it is the other part of the problem, right? You would have to actually go the route of the Amish, so to speak, to go out to where, like, seek out the places where property costs are lower so that you could have a chance of not going into massive debt in order to have a life that was comfortable for you. And remember, it's not always to go back to the dirt house that I was talking about at the very beginning or earlier on. My ancestors, they came and they lived in that dirt house, but they didn't live in a dirt house for their whole lives, right? They lived in a dirt hut long enough to save money, learn English, get established, get a job, and then their kids had better lives than they did, right? But in the meantime, they were not constrained by um, all the conveniences that we have thanks to the expensive home construction industry that we have today. And don't get me wrong, I like having a lot of those features, but to require them is to not allow somebody else to opt out of them while they earn enough money to make their own choice to buy the things that they want. And if you want to escape this, you're going to have to just be proactive in changing your expectations. We're not at You can find a place to live affordably if you really want to. If you really want to make that choice, you can do it. It it's not going to be great, um, but it would be temporary. Man, I'm just thinking. I hate things like this because there's like 10,000 things that I want to say, 10,000 things more that I wanted to go over, but I want to talk about this book here. Um, the Machine Stops, and it's interesting. So this is 1909, and in the home, I'll just describe what's in this home. So like she just sits in a chair, and if she wants to go to her bed, she presses a button and the chair just takes her there. If she wants food, she presses a button and the food's brought to her. And this is the machine, right? All of her wants are needed. All of her wants and needs are taken care of by the press of a button, and they are brought through pneumatic tubes. Of course, remember in 1909 they didn't have the internet yet, but they had pneumatic tubes. Um, so things of that sort. But this machine, oh, I had it marked. This One of the characters has discovered that there's a way of life outside of the machine, and this is causing great problems. And he says, the son says, "I want to speak to you, but not through the wearisome machine. You mustn't say anything against the machine." "Why not?" "One mustn't." "You talk as if a god had made the machine," cried the other. "I believe that you pray to it when you are unhappy. But men made it. Do not forget that. Great men, but men. The machine is much, but it is not everything." And then it talks about they're talking through not a phone, but like a metal plate which transmits light. "I see something like you in this plate, but I do not see you. I hear something like you through this telephone, but I do not hear you. And that is why I want you to come. Pay me a visit so that we can meet face to face and talk about the hopes that are on my mind." And it takes her, when she finally does leave the machine, leave her room in the machine. Um, it says that she had not been out of her structure for years because everything had just been brought to her. Now, in this book, the greatest thing, the worst thing that can happen to you is homelessness, which is kind of what one of the thoughts of why I'm bringing this up. It's the person who's kicked out of the machine that is in the worst situation, and their expectation is that if you leave the machine, you're just going to die. There's no way you can possibly survive. But why would you want to leave the machine? The machine provides for all of your needs. It gives you your housing. It gives you your food. It gives you your education. It it meets all of your needs. And if there are some things that have to be apportioned out, if the old line, everyone's equal, but some people are more equal than others. The machine is smart enough to figure it out, and you just have to trust the machine. Or your option is to be homeless. It's kind of like the wild man in a Brave New World. Everyone in the Brave New World is very, very happy and content in their place with their soma, but the wild man is the homeless man. And maybe what I'm saying is maybe we should stop worrying so much about buying homes and be homeless in this context. Be the wild man. Be the one who says to the machine, I'm not going to let you continue to cajole me and nudge me and shove me in particular directions. I am going to be the captain of my own ship. I'm not going to read that quote. By the end, what happens is the machine begins to die. I know, giant spoiler alert. You should really get this book. You can read it in like an hour or two. It's a really quick read. But spoiler alert: the machine starts to die down. It doesn't say why, but there are clues and hints. And what it sounds like to me, if I may be so bold, it almost sounds a lot eerily like what I think might happen with AI. As everything gets turned over to AI. Well, AI right now is being trained on content that creators and creative people come up with. But what happens if all of a sudden all the creators just stop creating? What is AI going to train itself on then? I suppose AI will train itself on other AI. What? Or yeah, it seems like that won't work, right? So you need people in the world who are above the machine, so to speak, who are not subject to the machine, who can make the changes that are necessary to keep it going. Innovative people who can work with their hands, or however you want to put it. So at some point near the end of this, the machine starts to die, and it sounds like it's because there's nobody left to mind the machine. Everyone's in the machine and no one can get out. So it goes on. The machine stops. This is the name of the book. And I won't tell you what happens when the machine stops. It's not pretty. But one of the characters says, oh, wait. Back up one page. Today they are homeless. But tomorrow, another person says, oh, tomorrow, some fool will start the machine again. Tomorrow. Another one replies, never, never. Humanity has learned its lesson. Would that it would. It has not learned its lesson. We continue to put bureaucrats in charge of our lives, policymakers. We give our president the power to make or break the livelihoods of 300 million people by his policies. That is, I don't care if you love him or hate him, whether it's Obama, it's Trump, George Bush, Jimmy Carter, doesn't matter. No single person should have the ability to wreck the economic well-being or make the economic well-being of tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. It's too much power. Because I'm not saying it's too much power from the point of view of like it's on the verge of, like, tyranny is hovering, although very well could be. I'm talking about like that's kind of like a giant man walking through a society of ants. It doesn't matter where that giant steps, he's going to kill some ants. Now, some ants will be okay, but others will be dead. And we have a system where our giant will never even know who he just crushed. We're picking winners and losers, and no one ever knows who the losers are. But as the machine continues to grow and we all get sucked into the machine, there are fewer and fewer people who could possibly mend the machine and keep it going, with inevitably a popping of the balloon, a popping of the machine. So we don't really have any excuse for not seeing this, because we can go back through time And everywhere we look, I talked about the housing crisis. We got college loans going out of control. I talked about China's one child policy. I could give you all sorts of examples. Um, and we're still going to see very soon. I should rephrase that because it never happens. But the money supply is like a nightmare just ready to unfold. Eventually, one day we're going to wake up and the US dollar, we're going to need like 20 million of them to buy a cup of coffee. It'll happen in a blink of an eye. I just don't know when. Um, it always pops. And the difference between having our experts decide this, decide who lives and succeeds, and having the quote market decide is the culpability that's involved. If you decide, if you choose to make the decisions for the lives of tens of millions of people, if you think that you're the guy for that, you're smart enough, you're compassionate enough, you're um, you're the genius, and you are omni compassionate. If you think you're that person, then you're responsible for what happens, both the good and the bad. But what happens right now is our experts, they make decisions and they only want to be accountable for the quote good things that happen. They don't want to take accountability for the bad things that happen. We saw this very vividly with COVID, didn't we? all those all those public health people and policymakers going out of their way. Oh, we did all these wonderful things. Oh yeah, but you also put a whole bunch of people out of business. You ended businesses completely. You crushed livelihoods. Oh well, but I meant well. So don't you think you need to say you're sorry, maybe, or apologize? Well, no, because we meant well. No, that's what I'm talking about. Like that attitude. When you decide, and as a society, we have made this decision to double down on the machine. We want the machine to keep on going. We want it bigger. And every time that it gets bigger, we find out some other thing that, well, it's not going to work unless this also is being run by the machine. Oh, then let's give it to the machine. We'll have the machine do it. And every time we do something, we're like, oh, well, gee whiz, if we do that, then people are going to do this. It only works if everyone participates. Like Obamacare, right? Obamacare can only work if everyone is forced to participate. Has anyone noticed problems in our healthcare system? Sounds like another bubble, right? It always pops. You can't resist it. The difference between the two systems, in the one case, people are responsible for their own lives, right? If I make a mistake and something happens as a consequence to that I don't enjoy, that's on me, right? But I can't blame anyone else. It's nothing else. It's like nobody else's responsibility. I made the decision. If I decide that I am going to compel 500 people to only have food if I provide it, like they're only going to be allowed to eat if I provide the food. That's what I'm going to do. And then like something happens and I get in a car accident and I forget to feed the people for 500 people and like 20 of them die. That's on me at that point, right? I'm the one responsible. I took responsibility for those lives. I was going to be the one to feed them. I didn't. That's now on me. I took that responsibility. But if I forced them, I gave them no choice. There was no way for them to escape that situation. There's no way that they can be accountable for that. And that's kind of the reason they can be like they're not responsible at that point because they can't do anything in their own interest anyway because we've closed the door for that. The machine won't let them do it. So, for example, if you don't like what has happened with your health care because of Obamacare, excuse me, you're kind of out of luck, right? You're stuck with it. Well, Barack Obama is not aware of all the lives that have been horribly hurt. The outliers. We'll just give benefit of the doubt. The outliers. He doesn't even know about them, right? He's just like clueless, but he's responsible for them. And you can't really escape the system. You can't get out of it. You're stuck in the machine. So the machine's got to go away, and we have to begin to um, embrace the possibility. We have to begin unwinding the machine, and I'm not very optimistic that this is going to happen anytime soon. I don't see it happening probably in my lifetime because unless it pops, right, which is entirely plausible. So that means that you have to on your own like willfully extract yourself as much as you possibly can from the system to take the hooks of the machine out of your back and begin to make your own way. And that means rethinking a lot of the things that you take for granted. For an example, maybe owning your own home. Yeah. For example, maybe owning your own home at the age of 21 isn't a good idea. Maybe the wise thing is to rent. Maybe the wise thing is actually to leave the city and go to the countryside where the cost of living isn't so high. And yeah, maybe you're going to have to work some crap jobs, but you'll be able to save some money and then you'll return on your own terms to a situation where you can buy that house. Maybe you shouldn't be going to college. Why? Because the prices are obscene and you're not getting value for your dollar. I mean, there are obviously going to be some exceptions there, depending on what your career choice is. You might need to get like a particular degree if you want to go somewhere. But like if you're just going to go to college, and you get underwater basket weaving, or you study the gender studies of the subtropical African frog, and that's your degree, well then no, it's no surprise that you're only going to be able to get a job at a 7-Eleven for $15 an hour, right? So maybe don't do that. Maybe don't go to college. Think about why is it that you wanted to go to college? Like why are you doing this? Make this decision. Um, there's a lot of people who say, um, well, you should only have kids when you're ready to have kids. Goes back to the young family kind of thing. And what does that mean? And who has told us what that means? The, does that mean both parents like this is your plan? We're only going to have a kid when both parents have a good job. Well, I've I've crossed that bridge. I had this problem personally. At a very long time on this podcast, I said I was going to talk about this. This is the moment we've arrived. Um, Childcare costs a ton of money, right? And we found out that in order for me, um, I don't know if that's the way to put it. Uh, for both of my wife and I to work, it would have cost us $800 or $900 a month just for the childcare. But I was only making like 1,000 a month. So it's like it's church work. Okay. So if you must know. So like where is it written that we should live lives such that both parents are working just because daycare is available? Well, in our situation, we made the decision. We said, you know what? We're not really going to gain a whole lot by having somebody else raise our kids. We're going to be giving somebody all of our money, and somebody else will be with our kids all day long, and we'll basically be strangers to them. How about we choose a different way? And so in our situation, I ended up being the stay-at-home dad. And was it easy financially? No. We had to pay our dues. And I think my kids would probably say they wish that I had gone to work and that I had left them with daycare. Just Yeah, one's listening over here. No, I have no idea what they think about that. But that was like those are the kinds of decisions you need to look at, and you need to say, I know what the world is saying. I know what the machine says. I know what the status quo says, but is that really the right thing to do? Is it the right way to do it? Maybe the best thing to do would be to have a parent at home. And if you can't afford that in the city, then go somewhere else. Stop being a slave to the machine and doing whatever it says. Make some decisions on your own. So I'm gonna close off with I this was kind of the close, but um I this child care thing. If you remember the Jaffa memo, bring it back over here. Part of one of their tactics. This was like one of the things that they wanted to do. If you remember, in that second column there, their goal for reducing the population was to require women to work and provide few child care facilities. Like this was the plan, or this is the thought, right? Now, there's lots of ways to require someone to work. One is just to create a situation where they feel like they have to work, right? Well, I talked about the discouragement of private home ownership. Like, what does that have to do with people choosing not to have as many kids? Well, if you don't have your own home and you have to rent, then obviously you're kind of stuck with, well, I can get a 2 bedroom or a 3 bedroom place, right? I can only afford a 2 bedroom, so I guess I'm only going to have one kid. So you don't make a law. This is the different. Like the Chinese said, we're going to require them to only have one kid. In America, they said, you know what? We're going to discourage private home ownership, and they will make the decision on their own to only have one kid, and they will think that they made that decision on their own, right? Even though it was basically forced on them. But it's been known for a while that this really is a transformation of society. And I wanted to share this article with you from 1981, and then I'm going to close it up here. I don't know if you're going to be able to read this very well. So I don't mean to take this into a turn where we're now talking about childcare, but all these things are all kind of wrapped up together. That's the thing that people don't understand, is that it's all intertwined. But here's an article from 1921. The title is Congress is Subsidizing Deterioration of the Family. And in this article, if you read it, this person is upset that wealthier families are able to use this child care tax credit. I don't know if this tax credit still exists or not. But then the last paragraph, excuse me, on the last column there, third side, um, where it says the first full paragraph, the writer says, I believe this issue is a perfect example of the cancer of materialism that has stricken our society. We do not take care of our own families these days. We want someone else to bear that responsibility. I think it's a sad commentary on our society when the Senate of the United States says, as a matter of social policy, that we should make it easier for people who have neither the financial necessity nor personal need to forsake their responsibility to care for their own children. It seems to me that the single biggest problem facing us as a society today is a desire to avoid individual responsibility. And this daycare tax credit is just one more example of that evasion. The daycare centers and nursing homes blossoming across the American landscape are monuments to our growing unwillingness to accept personal responsibility for those to whom we owe the most: our children, our parents, and our grandparents. If we continue to turn our backs on those who are closest to us, how long can we hope to meet any of our obligations as the great nation history intended us to be? So there's a different take on childcare. Who is this radical right wing extremist anyway? Oh, it's Joe Biden. Like I said, these things are an open secret. Everyone knows about how these forces work. I should say, everyone in the past knew. We're just living on the bubble today. We're just like, we look back 6 months, and that's as far back as we seek our explanations for how we have come to be in the situation that we're in. And that's a mistake. We need to be looking back 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80 years back and begin to see the chain of causes and effects that have brought us to this moment today. And only by understanding the full scope of that context can we rise above the machine and take control of our own lives. And that's the way God intended it. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Appreciate your time tonight. Have a great night.